Hello, and welcome to Columbus Metropolitan Club. I'm Ray Paprocki, a board member for CMC and publisher and general manager of Dispatch magazines. It's great to see everyone here today. So today's forum, it's titled Moving People and Goods Across Borders, Dollars and Cents, and that's S-E-N-S-E. It was developed in partnership with the Greater Columbus Sister Cities International, represented here by many of their members and friends. Won't you please help me thank them? So, quick note, audience questions today will be submitted in writing. You'll find a piece of paper for this in your flyer, that's the forum flyer. Please include your name and your question. These will be collected midway through the discussion for consideration. Okay, so today's forum. The free movement of people and goods across borders is fundamental to the reality of our current global economy. Recent rhetoric would appear to support a protectionist mindset, a throwback to earlier times, which can be argued that we may find ourselves worse off for it in the vibrancy of our economy and in our pocketbooks. But let us listen to some of those folks who are dealing with these issues firsthand. So please welcome Senior Director of Policy Outreach at the Ohio Farm Bureau, Brandon Kern, Vice President and Co-Director of the International Program, Nationwide Children's Hospital, Karen E. Heiser, Managing Director, Global Trade and Investment, Columbus 2020, Deborah Shearer, President, Greater Columbus Sister Cities, Tim Sward. Tim,
great.
Stage
Thanks,
is yours.
Appreciate it. So it is a privilege to be here, and I want to thank CMC for this opportunity and for our panelists. This is a particularly interesting topic for me since this is what I've been doing my whole career, is engaging in international movement of people and products. I was born in Columbus, but I was raised in a small town up north in New London, Ohio, on a dairy farm. And through the agricultural community, appreciated the importance of trade. And I also had an opportunity to travel when I was 16 to China, only because I was a decent runner, finished 7th in the state in my freshman year in cross country, and a nonprofit in California called International Sports Exchange invited me to run. And I was 16 years old. I had never even been in downtown Columbus or Cleveland alone. And I was in Hong Kong, and I was just wandering around, and I felt so alive. This is 30 years ago, and it's 31 years ago now. And we had our race in Canton, China, which is now known as Guangzhou, and we were running against a pre-Olympic training team, or team that was training for the Olympics, so the U.S. lost every single race in that track meet. And on top of that, we were given boiling water instead of cold water, and we all freaked out about that. But 30 years ago, when you looked out the bus or out of your 4- or 5-star hotel, which we were in, nothing else looked like where you were staying at all. It was all bicycles. We had a minder with us the whole time. This is back when Hong Kong was in British control, but I'm talking more about the China experience part of it. I've been to China 5 times since over those years, and it has changed so dramatically. And I think one of the most important things about firsthand experiences is maybe erasing impressions that you had 30 years ago or 10 years ago in some cases. So to me, this is a really important topic because it also is one that you hear a lot of criticism or skepticism about. Because particularly if you're in a company or another organization, if you are the person that may travel for the first time, people want to know, why are you doing that? What's the importance of that? So I want to get started and learn a little bit about the panel. I want to know where you guys were raised, and I'd like to know about your first international trip and how that came about. Karen?
So I was raised in Columbus, and my first international trip was in high school and, as well, and we did 6 weeks in Europe, visiting different cities, and by doing that, it just opened the door to different cultures, different food, the importance of reaching out and trying to make connections, even if you don't speak the language, but you can always find a way to connect.
So how were you able to do that?
By By taking risks.
Well, I mean the first trip. Who organized it, or why did you
It was a youth group. So we went with youth from Walnut Ridge, and it was organized as an exchange program to learn not about other high school students, but just about the culture.
And what kind of impact did that have on you personally?
Well, I've been involved in international things ever since.
What about that experience led you there?
Two things. Number one, that there's a wonderful, exciting world out there, and it's also great to come home.
All right, that's true. Deb, how about you? Where were you raised?
So I was raised in Chillicothe, Ohio, and my first international trip was walking across the border from San Diego to Tijuana when I was 8 years old with
Not
my
alone, though.
parents.
Not alone, okay.
My parents wanted to go to the market, so we crossed the border. And I don't know that I would necessarily classify that as the first trip because it was maybe 4 hours. But after that, I was, my first, what I would call real international experience was when I was in high school and went with our Spanish club to Mexico for a week. And that was I was a sophomore in high school.
And that made an impact on you as well?
That made an impact. And then I decided I wanted to study Spanish. And then my next trip was a trip to Venezuela, which is a place most people don't go any longer, with my family. We had friends whose wife was Venezuelan, and so we went for 10 days to Venezuela. And from that point, I was a junior in high school. From that point, I knew that international was something that I wanted to do every day, and it hasn't wavered since.
What about it? I mean, how did you know that?
You know, it's kind of like, I guess, when you go on that first date and you kind of get butterflies in your stomach. That was a long time ago for me, but and you know, for me, it's that feeling that you get, that energy and rush that you get from experiencing new cultures, experiencing new people, experiencing new viewpoints.
Excellent. Brandon?
So I grew up in rural Fairfield County, actually not too far from Deborah, in Amanda, Ohio, which is just outside of Lancaster and Fairfield County, a small farm town. So small farm town boy through and through, and now working for the Farm Bureau and using those experiences as well. But so Tim tells me that I can't use the Bahamas as my example of my first international
Depends what
travel.
you were doing.
So I don't really understand why. But no, I guess my first true international travel in Tim's standards then would be a trip that my wife and I took to Costa Rica. And had a great opportunity to travel all through the country to see the rainforest. We flew into the capital and stayed at a place on the Pacific coast and rented a car and drove ourselves around to get there and really got a chance to see the country. And I guess that was impactful for me, coming from the agriculture industry lens, to see production, the type of technology that we have able to employ here in the United States versus what they don't in a country like Costa Rica was pretty significant to me. That made a big impact.
So probably more telling is all of you have children. Have you taken them or encouraged them to have these experiences, or will you, in some cases, because they're probably too young right now? Brandon?
Absolutely. Yeah, my kids are still pretty young, but that's something that's really important to Amy and I, for them to see different perspectives. Again, we made the decision to move back to small town, back on the family farm where we grew up, and so that's even more important now for me and my family. The kids need to see that there are things outside of that small town setting.
Sure. Karen?
I'm old, and so our children are all grown. Our middle son has lived for 12 years in Tokyo, and has traveled all over the area. And this is a young person who in high school said, we live in Burlington, and would it be okay after college if I come back here and stay here? So that international experience has really just opened the world to him.
That's awesome. Deb, you have an interesting recent story.
Yeah, so I have a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old, both boys, and they've both traveled extensively outside the U.S. The most recent trip that we were in the Caribbean for Christmas, but I'm not counting that one.
Can't count that.
I can't count that. But last year, it was probably September timeframe, my 10-year-old said, you know, Mom, I'd really like to go see the Great Wall. And so I said, are you serious? He said, yeah. I said, I have some miles, some airline miles. Let's go. We'll leave the day after Thanksgiving. So my 10-year-old and I went for 5 days to Beijing and took him to the Great Wall. We went to Tiananmen Square. We went to the Forbidden City, went inside locals' homes, had a meal with them, played some mahjong while we were there. So the only trouble with all that is, at the last day, he looked at me and he said, I think I want to go to Barcelona next. I went, boy, I've created a monster.
Excellent. Well, now that we know you, we're going to put you on the hot seat, and I'm going to have to start with Brandon. What is the Farm Bureau's position on free trade?
We're generally for free trade, Tim. No, obviously, trade is incredibly important for American agriculture in general, and particularly here in Ohio. So agricultural exports account for about a little over $4 billion of economic activity for our producers just here in the state of Ohio alone. And so nationally, it's about 136 billion, I think, is what we're forecasted for this year for agriculture exports. So that's pretty significant in terms of economic activity. So as you drive out across beautiful rural Ohio and you see those rows of soybeans and corn growing, you can think of it in terms of every third row that you see as you drive past them is destined for some foreign market around the world. And so when you think about it that way, a significant amount of what we are growing here in Ohio and across the United States is, part of our market is international. So it is really important for us, and of course we are very much in favor of trying to promote trade and market development wherever we can.
Sure. So I'm from a soybean farm. We still grow soybeans now, and I'm always amazed at how many people are familiar with soybeans but don't actually know what they're used for, particularly the commodity soybeans. Could you explain that and where the markets are internationally for this?
Sure, yeah. So I think the biggest market is China, by far and away. So of that $4 billion of economic activity for agricultural exports in Ohio, about half of it is soybean sales, and most of that is going to China. You have a nation whose protein consumption is significantly increasing, and not a whole lot of capacity to grow the feed that they need for to raise livestock to produce protein in those diets. And so with that exploding population in China, they are looking desperately to find sources of livestock feed. So a lot of what we produce here in the United States ends up as livestock feed for the Chinese and feeding their growing population. There are a lot of other uses for soybean as well. It's kind of the if you talk about, a lot of people talk about superfoods, this is kind of the super commodity. The oils out of it can be used, pretty much a vegetable oil product that you use at home is probably going to consist of quite a bit of soybean oil. There are uses that are in development too, using science and technology to develop soybean products, even in automobiles components. So the dashboards and things like that, using soybean material in that way is also something that's in development as well. So lots of uses for that super commodity, as I call it.
And one of the interesting things about agricultural exports for the United States is that we actually have a surplus, which, Deb, is not true with manufacturing always.
That's true.
Why is that?
Well, we live in a global economy, and companies are looking to place manufacturing and do things where they can have the best productivity and generate the most profit for their companies. And many times that can be in the U.S., and other times it's outside the U.S. So it just varies on where it's at and what market they're serving.
Sure.
What's happened, or what we have noticed companies really doing over the last several years, is really trying to regionalize production. And so what you find is companies who are producing in the Chinese marketplace are generally producing for Asia, or serving just that domestic market. And it's the same. We're seeing the same coming the opposite way. So foreign direct investment may be looking to actually put production facilities in the U.S. specifically to serve the North American market.
So Columbus 2020 is trying to reduce unemployment, increase jobs, raise the wages. You're probably getting ready for a name change, I would imagine. But how are you doing so far with your goals, and how important is exporting and foreign direct investment to meeting those goals?
Yeah. So we have what I would say 3 main overarching goals that we have at Columbus 2020. 150,000 net new jobs, $7 billion in capital investment, and a 30% per capita wage increase for our 10-year period. So we're on track currently to meet all 3 of those goals, one of which we would expect to surpass definitely this year, which is the capital investment piece. But exports really contribute towards those totals, and I'll just throw out some figures in a variety of ways in which they're contributing. From the jobs perspective, every $1 billion in exports is about 5,000 jobs. It accounts for 5,000 jobs locally. If we look at the wage piece, export jobs and foreign direct investment jobs tend to pay better. When we did a study several years ago, that wage gap between non-export jobs and jobs that are export related was about a $30,000 wage difference a year for individuals. So, you know, they pay better, which helps certainly in our goal of raising the per capita wage here in the Columbus region. And then we look at the other things that contribute. Companies who export generally have a better thumb on what their competition is doing around the world, and so they're more innovative, or they find that they're keeping pace with their industry much greater, which means that they're going to stay alive in the U.S. A lot longer. And so all of those things contribute towards making a much more dynamic, vibrant, and growing economy.
So who are you competing with, or who are we competing with when we're trying to attract foreign companies to invest in Central Ohio?
It depends on the industry, but you know, we've had cases where we've been working with Chinese companies that are looking at putting facilities in the U.S., and we're competing not only against maybe our neighbor in Pennsylvania or north in Michigan, if I dare say that, but we're also competing against Thailand in some cases, or whether they continue to do that particular production in their home base and continue to export from their markets to the U.S.
Well, everyone wants to know, why are we succeeding when we succeed, but I want to know, why are we failing when we fail in this competition?
Yeah, so again, each company's decision process is differently, and the criteria that they use to make that decision varies. We were working with a Chinese company that was looking to do production in the U.S. in an area where there are currently countervailing duties. So they needed to make a decision on where to produce. They chose to do that production in Thailand as opposed to the U.S. because it was a market much more similar to their own than the U.S. And they could not pay countervailing duties from products coming to Thailand. So that's one reason. Relationships are critically important when it comes to doing international work, and it could be that somebody's in the organization who's making a decision went to the University of Pennsylvania, or so there's some direct connection. So those are the types of things that don't necessarily disqualify you, but maybe put you over the edge.
Okay. Karen, I'm going to switch over to you. Nationwide Children's Hospital. Heroes in the community for what they do with children, particularly with rare diseases. But what's the international connection? Why would you have international programs? What's the value for your institution?
So I'm going to give you 2 examples. 75% of the emerging infectious diseases are transmitted by animals. And so even to think of healthcare, it's not just about human health. It really is across that continuum. And so, whether you're talking about Ebola or other kinds of diseases, healthcare is no longer local. Healthcare is global. And when you have a child who is born with a rare condition, you don't care where, you want the best minds, the best hands, the best skill to take care of that child. And so if that person happens to have come from another country, when you're facing that infant with congenital heart disease, that's fine. I mean, you want the very best person. So let me give you an example. Children born with a single ventricle heart didn't have a real good outcome for a number of years, and we've made tremendous progress. But the problem is that kids grow, right? And so you constantly have to be doing additional surgeries as their heart grows, as the valves have to grow, and so they're subjected to that ongoing intervention. Well, we were very fortunate to recruit Dr. Shinoka, who was trained in Japan, and he has developed, through his research, tissue engineering. And so you build a scaffold, and then you can tissue engineer the patient's own cells to grow these valves, and so they don't have to have that repeated surgery. Now, isn't that a win-win for everyone?
Sure.
So from a parent who has a son who will require ongoing surgery and a patient of a children's hospital, yeah, absolutely. I can vouch for that. If you can eliminate those ongoing surgeries, what a relief it will be to parents of kids in those situations. Absolutely.
So are there any concerns from your organization at the hospital regarding the rhetoric that's going on in the country related to immigration?
There are a lot of concerns. There's a lot of, I think the unknown is really one of the biggest challenges, right? I mean, so we have, at any one time, we have over 100 researchers in our research institute who are not US born. At any one, for any given year, we have about 100 or more international visitors who come. That open dialogue is at risk, and so as you become more narrow in your focus, you don't have the opportunity. People aren't challenging you to think differently. They aren't bringing new ideas. They aren't encouraging new ways of approaching problems, and so we are very concerned about that. I'm responsible for all of our residency and fellowship programs, and there were some residents who had competed against everyone else, had taken all the tests, and were selected to be in a residency program across the country. And they maybe when the initial order came out, if they were in Canada, they couldn't even get back into the United States. Their patients couldn't be cared for because they couldn't get back into the United States. And so there are a lot of ramifications of limiting our thinking.
Do you feel like that, excuse me, is being communicated in the news? Are people hearing that side of it, or do you think not?
I think that there are other issues that are drowning out those human stories.
What about you, Deb, as far as trade? Do you feel like...
So as we were sitting here, I was just thinking about, you know, the immigration ban and the travel ban really takes those countries off the list for companies who may want to invest in the U.S. to have a facility. So we've just eliminated countries who may, in some cases, have the wherewithal and the financial stability to invest, but if you can't get your people in, that's a problem. You're not generally going to invest in a place where you can't get your people in. So that's a challenge. Then those companies start to look at other markets like Canada. Is Canada a viable option for them for investment? And they reap the benefits of those dollars coming in and the jobs that are being created by those companies.
And I think we definitely see it from the agriculture perspective as well. I mean, so much so that Zippy Duvall, who's the president of American Farm Bureau at American Farm Bureau's annual convention a month and a half ago, felt the need in his main address to the delegate body to kind of reach out to our partners in Mexico specifically in an attempt to reassure our customers there that American agriculture is committed to continue to engage in trade with them. And so for a leader of an organization like American Farm Bureau to feel the need to do that, I think it's probably pretty significant, and he's hearing some of the negative feedback that we're getting from some of our international partners. So it is real, and it can have a real impact on our trade relations across the world.
But you also do an outreach in rural Ohio. I'm talking to those constituents. And when I drove there last fall to go see my nephews every weekend, the candidate that was railing against free trade and a lot of engagement internationally, yard signs were everywhere.
Sure.
And he actually became president. I'm just curious, what are they saying specifically about international engagement on any of those topics?
No, I mean, that's an excellent point, Tim, and it is something that I think we as a country, we need to address and we need to have a conversation about. Because in Foreign Affairs magazine, this current edition, Walter Russell Mead wrote a great article, I think, that kind of laid out the perspective of the core group of Trump supporters and the mistrust that this group has in the intentions of their government right now. And so, this audience, I think, probably automatically, when we start talking about international trade, we automatically go to dollars and cents, and it's in the title of today's topic. But for this group, I don't think it's all necessarily about dollars and cents. Certainly there's a segment of that population who were in auto manufacturing, for example, and lost jobs, and they equate that to the NAFTA agreement and trade deals that didn't look out for them, that had ulterior motives written into them. That's what this group sees. And so there's a segment there that it really hits home economically, but I think it also, a segment of that population just truly believes that over the past decade or longer, that their own government hasn't looked out for their needs as well. And that's a real personal thing. And I think, people were influenced to vote the way they did based on that feeling as well. So it's two-sided. There's a real economic consequence that we have to keep in mind and the ramifications for our trade relations. But I think there's also kind of this systemic issue lying underneath in our society in general that needs to be addressed in rural America is where we're feeling that.
So as a representative of Farm Bureau, how do you respond to them, or what are you trying to highlight to at least challenge some of those beliefs?
Yeah, well, I think most of our members understand the importance of international trade for their operations, and so I think it's a matter of having them help educate their rural community counterparts. But I think it's also giving the current administration a little bit of the benefit of the doubt as well. And to be quite honest with it, I think a lot of folks involved in agriculture would like to see what the ultimate outcome is in terms of the policies that the current administration starts to roll out. Because even with some of the campaign rhetoric we heard, we're already seeing maybe a step back from that, particularly in trade policy. While we were talking about 45% and 35% tariffs on China and Mexico during the campaign, the administration's kind of moved on from that in terms of the actual trade policies that they're looking to try to implement now, and maybe trying to focus on a few points within the NAFTA agreement that they could renegotiate that's much more focused. And so I think our members are kind of taking a wait and see type of attitude, and willing to give this current administration a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. But there is some growing concern about how the rhetoric impacts international relations and agriculture in particular.
But some of those concerns are legit, right, Deb?
I was going to say, I think it'll be interesting to see where everything shakes out when it comes to the border tax issue and how imports are being treated into the country, specifically if it does end up ultimately making its way to the consumer's pocketbook or pocket. There's been several articles that say if a border tax is placed on varying countries, that the cost of a car could increase somewhere between $2,000 to $2,500. So, the clothing that we wear would likely see an increase in cost. So it's a policy that will have an impact on everybody that's a consumer.
How about in the medical?
Well, let me give you an example. Children with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis aren't very common here. And certainly we have rheumatologists, and it's really devastating if you have a child with arthritis. It happens to be that in India it is much more common. So a former chief of rheumatology said in 1 year he could see more patients in India with certain kinds of conditions than in an entire career of practice in the US. And so that opportunity to learn from one another and to build relationships is really critical, and it's going to directly affect how we can best meet the needs of our community. And I think we lose sight of, you can't build all that capacity locally. You have to reach out to other groups.
So Greater Columbus Sister City is a member of Sister City International, and this is a movement, a people-to-people exchange movement that was started under President Eisenhower. And it was in response to World War II, and it was this idea that, if people could get to know each other on an individual basis, perhaps nations could avoid more international conflict or war because of the devastating losses that happened all over the planet in many countries due to that war. We're still not in a peaceful planet yet. But what kind of feeling do you have that trade or just international engagement with people from other cultures, whether here in Columbus in our own community or abroad, helps in that? Is that too idealistic, or is there a real foundation based on your experiences?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you look at the partnerships we have in European countries. Look at our relationship with China. I mean, we could, in a lot of ways, be a lot more adversarial with China than what we are. But I think we realize that we have mutually we have shared interests in our economic interests are so intertwined in the global economy that we find ways to get along on key points. So. I think if you could just, the examples are countless across the world, in my opinion. I don't know what the other panelists think.
I would just say that relationships are the basis for a lot of business transactions. And so it's important. And I think relationships help to, in many cases, cause for more peace. So.
Yeah, I mean, the phrase, friends do business with friends. I mean, and so these kinds of dialogues really help to build those relationships and build that trust. And there are opportunities that emerge from that you could have never known when you first started. So, for example, we have at Nationwide Children's, we have a colorectal program, and the surgeon in charge of that program is doing some unique things that no one else in the world is doing. And because of those relationships, we now have a direct relationship with the Israeli government. And when they have children with complex colorectal problems, this is where they send their children for care. And by the way, those are paying patients. And oh, by the way, we can build a more robust colorectal program because we have more patients, and so we can support a bigger team. So it's very reciprocal.
That's great. We do have some questions from the audience. I did receive one, not specifically for this forum, but I'm just going to throw it in here on Facebook, from a cousin of mine who's from rural Ohio, has not had the opportunity to travel, and he wants to know what kind of reception or what kind of opinion do people that you meet when you're international have about Americans, and specifically about our policy right now? What are you hearing from concerns or their thoughts? You were just recently in Africa, Karen.
Yes, we just got back last Friday. And I think that in general, I have had nothing but positive experiences, that people reach out to you as individuals, they want to ask questions. If you approach them with an open and curious mind, they will reciprocate in spades. And it's interesting, so we have about 100 international visitors a year to Children's, and I do an exit interview with a lot of them. And I said, what surprised you most? And I was expecting the facilities or the equipment or, whatever. And what they said, what almost universally they say, is the way you organize healthcare. And that you have a team approach, and that doctors and nurses really are viewed as equal partners in that team. And I mean, this has been for 20 years that they've been telling us this. And I find that sometimes you make assumptions, and those assumptions are not really the things that most strike people.
Yeah.
I was just in Germany 3 weeks ago or so. So, an ally, a trading partner, long-time relationship, and I got to tell you, I got a lot of questions. I was there for military service, worked during the day, stayed in my little hotel in a little village in Bavaria at night, and the hotel owner would come and have a nightly conversation with me. They're very curious about how Americans are reacting to some of the rhetoric out there, and how widespread that feeling of America first is. Are we truly withdrawing and becoming more isolationist as a group as a country, as opposed to just maybe the leadership and some of the rhetoric we hear from the current administration? So yeah, I think that they're very, very curious and want to know kind of where this is going. How will it impact relationships with our longtime allies across the world? So there's a bit of concern, that I picked up, at least in Germany. I mean,
Debbie, you were just in China.
Yeah, so I was in China nearly a month ago now, and it really ranged from, what are you guys thinking? Are you crazy? to, there's a lot of respect for the business portion of President Trump, and thinking that really there are going to be good things that happen. So, with the companies that we've spoken to who are looking to invest in the U.S., it's caused some of them to take a pause and say, we're going to wait until we understand what the policies are better and how that's going to affect us as an operating business in the U.S. And there are others that said, we got to get the ball rolling. We got to be first. We want to be there before, things really start to play out. So it's a mixed bag.
I was in Brazil, in São Paulo, in our sister city of Curitiba in February, and met a lot of people. People that I was introduced to for the first time, many times never even heard of Columbus, Ohio. But as far as their relation to the American policy or foreign policy, there was interest and concern. They've been following it, but in Brazil, they've had their own issues that they recognize, but they're really interested in building companies or prosperity. So they still look at us very, very favorably, even if they might not like some of the policies or the rhetoric that's coming out. But I think that's always been the case from my experience. So we do have some questions here, and actually, Brandon, this is an intervention because this is a global partner for Sister Cities. Deb's on my executive committee, and this is a question from Jamie Sisto, who sits on our board as the chair, and he works for Sugargate Law. How does Greater Columbus Sister Cities International contribute to the community? I'll spare you on this one, and we'll jump over here to Deb.
I would say that the Sister Cities contributes in many different ways. One is making sure that we're engaged with the diversity of citizens that we have living here in Columbus. Tim has done a fantastic job in taking the sister cities that we have, and we're starting to form committees for each of those sister cities to really get the community engaged and dig in and do what they love to do to support those relationships. There's a lot of educational things that go back and forth. From a cultural aspect, that's great. I mean, that's going back and forth. We have a lot of business delegations that come in that are associated with our sister cities or the countries in which we have sister cities. So it's definitely contributing to the overall economy.
One thing that I was very excited about last year was that Mayor Ginther, along with former Mayor Coleman and Representative Hardin, or Councilmember Hardin, along with 18 other people from the local community, went to our first sister city in Africa, which was Accra, Ghana. And we engaged with the U.S. Embassy because it's the only sister city, or it's the only country where we have a sister city that's the capital of that country. So we got to engage with the embassy, which actually was really interesting for me because they helped us connect to some businesses that I wouldn't have been able to otherwise. But I also got an email from them 2 weeks ago letting me know that they met with Harrison Aful, who is a superstar Ghanaian soccer player that happens to play here in Columbus for the Columbus Crew, and who also came to my office last week to support his and pledge his support to helping us build our connections. Well, that news circled all through the country of Ghana, and I got a note back from the embassy again saying, hey, good job on that. And I didn't know that was going to happen. So those kind of connections help us promote Columbus internationally and can make those connections.
And helps us to build the relationships that we need to grow in, you know, a variety of different subjects.
Sure.
And Tim, you and I, maybe for 5 minutes before we sat down and ate lunch, you know, talked about, I don't know, a handful of different opportunities with agriculture, you know, working with you and your organization that we could look into and develop further. And it is just all about that network and building those connections. So I think that's proof positive right there that a 5-minute conversation could generate that many ideas just offhandedly is you know, a
Some people
testament
like
to the
that about
power.
me, and other people, geez, enough. What about you, as an actual investor, significant investor of ours? What do you see the value?
Well, I think as Columbus grows and in complexity as well as size, it's hard to know what are all the connection opportunities. And so Sister Cities is so involved in so many different areas. It's a way to call and say, oh, who might we reach out to connect? And they are that. We used to call it an honest broker. They're not the government. They don't represent any particular industry. They're there to really do what's best for Greater Columbus.
I agree with that. And just to plug, we're actually looking for a program director, so that job posting's out. So you might want to look on Sequence website there. All right, what else do we have here? This is from Jane Scott, who just recently got back from Vietnam and other parts of Asia. What impact will the uncertainty in the current administration have on food exports, considering the fact that sources of food must be consistent to feed any country's customers or people?
I don't know that we know yet, Jane. I think it's creating a lot of uncertainty, and I know that, you know, we've missed out. So the Trans-Pacific Partnership alone, by removing ourselves from that agreement, there were opportunities to gain by eliminating tariffs on agricultural products to both Japan, who, by the way, a top 5 agricultural trade partner without any guidelines, and Canada further had agreed to remove additional tariffs that still remain, even though NAFTA had been enacted on poultry and dairy. So there's 2 examples. Now, again, we have to have this broader context, and we understand in the agriculture community that the current administration sees problems with these, you know, multilateral trade agreements, but it's going to be important for the administration to also show them that they can broker individual trade agreements with some of our key trading partners, because it's vitally critical to the future of agriculture and food processing as well, which is also, by the way, pretty significant here in Ohio in terms of their footprint as well.
So I'm excited about this question for a couple of reasons. It's from an Ohio State international student, Sigrid Schomer. And the reason I'm excited about it is because international students contribute a lot to our local economy and the classrooms, particularly at Ohio State, by internationalizing many of the classrooms, some which I've had the privilege of teaching at Fisher. But the question here is, an international student at OSU, what is the best way for me to find, what What is the best way for me to use the fact that I am international to an advantage when applying for jobs to stay here after graduation?
Certainly, language plays a role in that. Many companies now do want individuals who are multilingual. I would also say that companies are looking for people with global experiences. As we've talked through this whole conversation, we don't live in a one-country world. And so they look for people who are well-rounded, who have global experiences, because many of the companies that they're looking to work in are global themselves. So highlighting those two areas, I think, are important.
And I would just add, the fact that you move here and can be engaged in an international experience shows the flexibility, and we all know that what our job is today is not going to be what our job will be 5 years from now. And so that flexibility and adaptability and teamwork, I think, is really a selling point.
So I was told we only have time for one more question, so I have all these questions, and it just doesn't seem fair, so I'll have to trump that with my last question. And unfortunately, this is recorded too. So I think we all in here care about the future, whether it's for our kids or for our own, just leaving a legacy or whatever. What is the best thing that we can do for the future as it relates to preparing the future, students, young people, people maybe not even born yet, for a great experience on this planet or in this community based on international engagement? And I'm just going to throw out there, what would be the value of having, let's just imagine every kid having one international experience before they graduate high school, or like what would that potentially do to our community? Brandon?
I think we need to do those things. The future is only going to become more integrated, I think, regardless of the resistance and the apprehension that certain segments of the population may have about that interconnectivity. I mean, technology has made the world smaller, and we have the ability to interact more now than we ever have, and I don't think anybody sees that ending anytime soon. I think there are real steps that we could take. Columbus Council on World Affairs has a great program where they work with local schools to expose students in that program to issues related to international affairs at a young age, and I think programs like that are fantastic. So I love the concept of getting kids international exposure. That might not always be feasible, depending on where you live, but maybe concepts of programs like that one at the Council for World Affairs is a good one that you could get into the classroom.
So I think one of the things that I'm proudest about being from Columbus is that we are a very giving community. And the way that, the people want to be involved in something. Everybody's really busy, and so you want to be involved in something bigger and feel like you're contributing to a bigger mission. And I can't. International experiences open your mind to, no matter how many challenges you're facing, they pale in comparison to some of the challenges elsewhere in the world. And I think that it level sets your perspective and helps you to feel part of this global planet.
Dad, thoughts?
I would just say that, I've seen this with my own children and the international experiences that they've had the opportunity to participate in, that it opens their minds. It lets them to view things in a different way. And to me, there's nothing better than that.
Yeah, I would say that definitely knowing that the world is not Columbus, Ohio, is a really important thing to gain. I had a conversation with our mayor, he's now former mayor of Across, Mayor Vanderpoy, and he used to teach and be a principal in the Carolinas for 30 years. And he said that every year he took a group of black students to Accra for one reason, so that they could see every role in society done by someone that looked more like them, so that they could dream beyond whatever limited potential future that they could have. And he basically said it changed the way they saw themselves. And I thought, that's really powerful, because a lot of times we might say, well, why would we send this certain group of people or invest in that? And I think it's for that very reason, to believe in themselves so that they strive to do more. Ray?
One of the things I love about CMC is you learn something, right? So the three things I'm taking away today are that visual of the every third row and China's dependency on soybeans, that amazing development going on with heart tissue, and that Deborah's 10-year-old son better be thinking really hard about the gift he's giving his mom for Mother's Day. All right. So if you want to continue the conversation, we've got coffee and cookies out here, and you can view and share today's forum and all other forums on CTV Columbus Television, on WOSU and PBS affiliates statewide through the Ohio channel, and anytime on CMC's website via YouTube. So please help me thank our partners, the Greater Columbus Sister Cities International. And then our speakers, Brandon Kern, Karen E. Heiser, Deborah Shearer, and Tim Sward. And then thanks to all of you for being here. We look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks.
Thank you.